We have found that some people that are already dead are still being on the list, electoral list. For example, somebody like Benan Jonga, who was one of the fellow president, comrade president of a political party that has been participating to elections previously, still on the electoral list. So he can be voting today. If on the 12th of October, maybe somebody can put a ballot for him, and we will be amazed to see that Benan Jonga maybe has voted for Bia. You have some minors in the electoral list, people that have not yet 12 years old, even some less than 12 years old, 18 years old, and things like that.
The Beyond Africa podcast. Welcome to the Beyond Africa podcast, the only platform where experts share their views on African issues. Ladies and gentlemen, you are once again welcome to the Beyond Africa podcast with me, your host, Ngalim Bernard. Today, we're discussing the transparency of electoral lists. Every election system in every country has an electoral list where voters register, and the electoral management body ensures that those who registered can actually vote. But the question we are exploring today is the viability of those lists. In some countries, definitely every country manages their list differently, but the outcome is supposed to be determinative. The outcome is to ensure that the elections are free, credible, and transparent so that those who are going in for the elections know those who have registered, can estimate the number of voters, their localities, and know where to assign their resources during campaigns. So the question here is, what is the situation of the electoral register in Cameroon? First of all, these elections are very critical for the life of Cameroon because the president is 92 years old. He has been in power for 42 years, and he is running to succeed himself. I can see Dr. Sibe laughing at us. In 2004, Frundi, the founding chairman of the Social Democratic Front, said we must computerize the electoral list if we want a transparent and credible election. The government eventually adopted elections technology in 2012, but allegations of fraud persist, meaning the computerization of electoral lists actually brings new risks like cybersecurity threats, and these threats involve disrupting digital systems, manipulating, destroying, and stealing voter data. This explains why political parties and other stakeholders must have access to the electoral list. And Maurice Kamto, who is not a candidate at these elections, filed cases with ELECAM and the Constitutional Council to ensure that the public, or at least political parties, have access to the electoral list as required by Article 80 of the Electoral Code. But he was denied this access. However, elections must meet certain standards. And these standards, while any certain standards stand key, first of all, there must be voter registration. Secondly, voters must have access to reliable information. Citizens should be able to run at elections. Voters must not be intimidated. Voting must be free from fraud, and ballots must be counted accurately and the correct results reported. And of course, the results should be respected. But can all these criteria be guaranteed if the computerized electoral list is not open to the citizens? What if there are double registrations, dead people registered, and people who are not existing on that electoral list? These are the questions that we are going to explore with our rich panel of guests. Before I present my guests to you, kindly like, share, subscribe, and comment. That is the best way you inform us about the quality of information we're giving you. And the panelists that I have here today are going to give you wonderful and accurate information. Let me start with Dr. Sibe Tombari, who is a Nigerian, and he's been working in the cybersecurity space for a very long time. He covered Nigerian elections from a cybersecurity perspective, right from the registration of voters to the declaration of results, and he has enormous wealth on how elections technology could be manipulated to favor a candidate or to discredit elections. Dr. Sibe, you're welcome to the Beyond Africa podcast again.
Thank you, Dr. Bernard. Always a pleasure to be here.
You are the first person I received on this podcast when I just launched, so we are happy to have you back.
Yeah, good to be back.
Thank you. I present Dr. Moise Eso to you. He's a militant of Stand Up for Cameroon, also a member of the platform UPC Manidem, and they've been doing some work to uncover irregularities on the elections management body's website, that is ELECAM website. You're welcome to the Beyond Africa podcast, Dr. Moise.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ngalim Bernard. I'm happy to be with you here.
Thank you so much. Then we have Barrister Remy Takang. He is tech and law specialist. Everything data privacy, cybersecurity, and AI related to the law, he knows it. So if you have anything related to those areas of law and cyber and technology, you can contact him. You're welcome to the Beyond Africa podcast, Barrister Remy Takang.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bernard.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. And let me start with you, Dr. Moise. You've been doing some exploration on the website of ELECAM and other related elections registration formalities. Can you give us a briefing of what you have found and what you think could be concerning?
Yes, thank you. Of course, for Cameroon, can I say 2016 denied to participate to these elections. That is the first thing I wanted to assess before I give those examples, because we already noticed that in the new electronic system some mistakes that are not really mistakes, because when you prepare yourself to make something wrong, is no more a mistake. It begins to be a disruption, a voluntary disruption. We have found that some people that are already dead are still being on the list, electoral list. For example, somebody like Benan Jonga, who was one of the fellow president, a comrade president of a political party that has been participating to elections previously, still on the electoral list. So he can be voting today. If the 12th of October, maybe somebody can put a ballot for him, and we will be amazed to see that Benan Jonga maybe has voted for Bia. You have some minors in the electoral list, people that have not yet 12 years old, even some less than 12 years old, 18 years old, and things like that. We have seen, as I say, teenagers and even youngest children that has been detected in several regions, and this since 2013. It's not only for the list of today. Then you can also have thousands of registration without photos, which means what? That anyone can take this name and put his own photo and vote in name of that person that has no photo on the registration. You have name that do not match with the gender. For example, you can have a women first name in front of a man pictures. It seems like in Cameroon, we know that we are not yet used to these changing gender. So it is not a question of gender, it's a question of mistakes, or what can I see, irregularities. And you have also surnames that are registered instead of first name and vice versa, which means that you can reach somewhere and say, I am Moise Eso, and on the electoral list it is written Eso Moise, and then they can deny you to vote according to if you have to vote against or for Bia. Those are type of things. And we have also some curious absence. For example, Paul Bia himself is not on the electoral list. How can he be candidate if he's not registered on an electoral list, unless they have hidden his name? And why should they hide his name? So it means that we have so many things we can say about this list, that the list is not reliable, really.
Thank you so much, Dr. Moise. What I want to find out from you about this list is, I would like to hear your perspectives, Barrister Remy and Dr. Sibe, on the ethics of exploring that list. We know that Elecam has not published the list. So do you have the legal authority to go into the website of Elecam to identify, in fact, to audit the Elecam registration list?
There is not a question of legal, because legality in Cameroon is something you can discuss about very all the day. But the fact is that since the list is public, and since the electoral laws says that you have the right to check if your registration is well done on the list, it means that you can check for somebody else. Because when you get on the website, you don't say, I am Moise So, and I cannot look at the registration of Mr. Ngalim Bernard. I can look it also, because you can be beside me to check with me on the same computer. So it's not a question of legality, it's a question of accessibility. It's a question of regularity. It means that if you want to check and I want to check, and we gather together somewhere with the same computer, we can check for everybody. And if we see that things are not right, then we can address it and say to Elecam, there is a problem there. You have to correct it. But if you want to do that, I think the half of the list should be corrected.
So, from these inconsistencies that you have identified, have you petitioned to Elecam to say these are the mistakes we have already identified? Can you fix them? And what has Elecam's reply been if you have contacted them?
The fact is that, as I told you, that's why I wanted just to assess it at the beginning. We in Stand Up for Cameroon and UPC Manidem, my party is part of Stand Up for Cameroon. We don't participate to this election. So we have addressed the question to those who participate to the election, to tell them that we can get together to address a petition to say to tell to Elecam that there are many problems on the electoral list. That we did. We said when we published all these irregularities, what I can say is more than not irregularities yet. Let's call it like that. We asked to those who are going to election, we said this is things we can do together, all party together. We can address a petition to say that there is something wrong in this electoral list and that we cannot go to election with such electoral list. Of course, they didn't follow us, or I don't say if they decided or not. I can have as observation is that nobody came with us to say we are going to address it to Elecam. And for us, since we are not participating to election, for us was like a proof to show that this electoral system is not something you can rely on to do a transparent election.
All right, let me follow up with you a little. Have you had anybody in Elecam or any other person from any other political party say that your findings are not grounded, your findings are wrong, and Elecam has a solid list?
No. Everybody, sometimes even those parties that are running for election, was using our proof to point that the electoral system is not fair. That means that nobody says that we are lying or that our finding was not correct or was fake news. Always reliable. And that's why I think even Elecam stopped publishing the list. And for a few moments, I think the website has been closed on that part of electoral list because our comrade Remita Singh, who is very, very active on X, on Twitter, was pointing all these mistakes or irregularities so that finally Elecam was obliged to close the electoral list because the print screen will have been very, very, we could have made many print screen of all that.
And has the media been reporting on your findings?
When we made a press conference, I think yes, there were some, but of course, media, it is not, how can I say, it is not sellable. It is not sellable new because it is too technical. And yes, everybody knows that in this electoral list, nothing is good. So we are just pointing evidence.
But it's the responsibility of journalists to break down technical stuff for everybody to digest and understand that information. And that is why this panel
That's what we are doing.
quite...
That's what we are doing. But
Yeah.
I don't think that on STV or Equinox and so on, that those emissions are the most one you can listen. I don't know how many emissions you have there where you are discussing technical issues like people that are dead still on the electoral list. They point it in newspaper or in the news, in fact. But I don't think in a debate we have been discussing. I'm not following everything that happened in Cameroon, of course. So I will be unfair to speak like somebody who know everything or who hear any emission. But I think that those are not the issues that are more sellable for the debate and to make buzz.
Absolutely. But I also think that it's easy to analyze the legal and political aspects of these things. I wrote an opinion piece recently analyzing Article 80 of the Electoral Code, which is the only article that talks about elections technology. Let me come over to you, Dr. Robinson. When you listen to this narrative and with your experience in Nigeria, without laughing at us that our president is 93 years old, he's been in power for 42 years, he's running to succeed himself. The experience you had...
And maybe he will finish his mandate in 99 at around 10 years. 100 years old.
Absolutely. So with the experience you have covering Nigeria, are these stories strange to you that it's happening in an electoral system?
Well, it's been rather sad across Africa, particularly most of sub-Saharan Africa. These stories have been popping up rather consistently, more than we would want. While I'm not going to want to single out that of Cameroon because I'm not in Cameroon, and also in respect to the sovereignty of Cameroon. So I believe that the guests in the studio are better equipped than myself to comment on what is happening directly. But I would analyze it from a reference point of best practice. If you're talking about election technology, if you're talking about election itself, are things you should look out for, and that's what I'm going to speak on. And by the time I speak on those things, then we can now juxtapose with what we have either in Cameroon or in Nigeria or in any other country for that matter. Now, you can't talk about a credible election when the system is itself not correct. So correctness is a key feature. And I did a paper which you had looked at before now with Professor Christian Connaught at the University of South Wales, and these are some of the themes which we got out of it. We reviewed the case of Nigeria and also compared with other jurisdictions. Estonia, an example. We looked at other jurisdictions as well, even in Africa, and tried to look at some of the lessons, whether in Kenya or whether in Ghana, some of the lessons that can be learned from there. Correctness is a key theme that emerged. Legal and regulatory framework. You can't talk about the technology. First of all, election itself is rooted in law. And the mistake that is made quite often is because we want to rush to put or deploy technology, we do that in isolation or without considering the existing legislations and the legal framework. And that has always been a mistake. It happened in Nigeria, where the citizen, the voter's record or voter database itself was not contemplated to be in an electronic format. That was later amended and corrected. So there's always those issues, even in terms of post-election tribunal and all of that, where some of the legal terminologies or even some of the technological terminologies don't get to be prominently and exhaustively discussed in court, because also there is the cybersecurity and forensic lack of cybersecurity and forensic readiness of the justice system itself. So legal and regulatory framework is also a problem. And then also technology is basically there not to alter the system, but just to enhance the system. So it ought to mirror a traditional voting system, but bring in efficiency, but not to change it. And there are also other concepts in a proper electoral system, voter anonymity, yes, but then transparency, just as it was already stated, the fact that you have a voter register that is disappearing and reappearing, and strange names and, names that you don't expect, it's already calling it to question. And then currently, you can't talk about these things without talking about the risk, the emerging risk, and cybersecurity is top of it. And if you look at like the Interpol Cyber Threat Assessment Report for 2025, prominence of it is attack at critical national infrastructure, which election technology happens to be one of them. So it is a threat either by nation-state actors or by private individuals or by young people who are just cyber or hacktivists or groups who are just looking to be heard. So this is a problem, and even the big countries of the West also struggle with this problem. So it's not just an African thing. And then transparency, which I'd mentioned, trust, very important. Citizens must trust the system, but trust is earned, trust is negotiated, trust has to be predicated on transparency. And so we need to look at also all this. And then very importantly, audit and verifiability. An electoral system should be able to be subjected to auditing, end-to-end verifiability. The fact that if systems have issues, they can ask questions, and this has also been issues around this even in the Western world. I remember in the case of Germany, the first electronic voting in Germany was heavily contested, and that was even why they had to stop actual electronic voting, because a man and his son actually sued the system, insisting that every public-centric process must be completely transparent, must be open and verifiable end to end. So very important. Also reliability. And then stakeholder engagement, which from what is being said already, I can tell that is lacking. For instance, if you want to use a piece of technology, all parties should come, have a feel of it, have a look at it, understand how it works, be able to understand what they can do if they do not agree with the results, what everybody can agree to say, okay, this is the process to contest this thing. If I want, let's say there's a voting machine, if I want to, for instance, do a forensic investigation of that voting machine before the election, you should define the steps. This is what you need to do, even in terms of extraction, in terms of applying for it, in terms of the actual forensic investigation, in terms of the reporting and all of the associated issues that go with it. And then also very importantly, you can't possibly deploy new systems on a nation on day one, on election day, D-Day, and that's when you're deploying it for the first time, there has to be pilot tests where you would have, showed these things to all the stakeholders and all of that. So these are some of the things we need to look out for in an electoral system. And so having identified all these things, we can now draw it back home and say, okay, as the case of Cameroon, are we sure about in terms of correctness, in terms of transparency, in terms of audit and verifiability, in terms of reliability, all of these things, because we have seen cases of failure across Africa. In Kenya, it cost lives. In Ghana, it happened. In Nigeria, as recent as 2023, it happened. There were clear issues of reliability, where elections could not be transmitted, straight from the polling units, which was what was promised. And things like that are things that can puncture the trust of citizens in an electoral system.
Thank you so much for that technical overview of what we expect as good practices in the electoral system. Now, with your experience across Africa and from what Dr. Eso just explained about the reticence by politicians in Cameroon to follow up with his movement on identifying the cybersecurity or the digital risk involved, are you seeing a pattern of politicians in Africa running towards cybersecurity, understanding the risks that are involved with the digitalized electoral systems? Because sometimes people just believe that by computerizing the electoral system, all the risks are gone.
Absolutely, it brings more risk. There are emerging risks, and this risk are even new. At least we know the risk you face if we're voting on paper. You know the risk of hijacking. You know the risk of, you could easily mitigate that because you know mitigation measures for that. But when we're talking about digital space, there are emerging risk, cybersecurity risk, which is rapidly evolving. The landscape is evolving. The possibilities of things that could happen, it continues to increase, so there are emerging risk, and this risk, there is any election, there's supposed to be an electoral risk assessment where you look at this, identify possible threat actors, possible risk, and then look at mitigation measures ahead of time.
Thank you. Barrister Takan, when you look at the Electoral Code of Cameroon, only one provision, one article specifies about elections technology, and it only mentions the biometric voter registration. That is it. It doesn't say who manages it, how it is managed, who can review the management processes. And even though the Electoral Code is the main legal framework that governs elections, does it look to you like it opens up the possibility of bringing in other legal frameworks like the cybersecurity law and other digital management laws to ensure there's an overview or a strengthening of the electoral system based on the legal framework?
Thank you very much, Dr. Bernard, for that question. I would say Cameroon does not want to evolve because when the law was first of all enacted, we didn't have so much technology in play. And now we see a lot of technology going on here and there, but they have failed to change the electoral code to reflect real-time events, and which is a major problem because, like you mentioned, if you look at the electoral code, there's just one section that mentioned biometric data. And the fact that it mentioned biometric data is supposed to be accompanied by data protection frameworks. We don't have that, I would say, maybe until recently, because in December of last year, Cameroon enacted the personal data protection law, but so far it hasn't gone into implementation because they gave like businesses an 18-month grace period, which means that it's not yet effective. I would say that. And the election is coming up in October of the same year. It means that by the time that the election is coming, there's not going to be any data protection regulation that will govern this particular aspect. So what I think is that they were supposed to put in place other frameworks to help make this electoral code a successful one. Because if we are talking about electoral technology, there's so many things that come in place. And I'm happy that Dr. Sibe has mentioned so many of them. There's a lot of risks. For example, when you talk about the data of the voters, accuracy, it do occur. And there's the possibility that those data can be stolen. So what are those frameworks in place to protect the data of the voters? We don't have any in place. We have the law on cybersecurity, but it doesn't mention anything concerning electoral issues. So when this happened during elections, what next? How do we go about it? Because if you want to follow up, the next issue will be that there is room for judicial recourse, but are the courts trained to handle electoral disputes, particularly when it comes to technology? They are not trained. So we have to consider all of that. And I think that the framework or the time frame now is already very late for all of these things to be taken into consideration. This is something that would have been done like long ago. So they cannot do it now, which means that as we go through this election, we should expect the unexpected. A lot of things can happen.
Yeah, Dr. Steven mentioned the necessity for a multi-stakeholder management of the electoral technology to ensure that every party is aware of what is happening, from the hiring of the service providers to the deployment of the technology till the collation of the results and declaration of results and audits and all the rest. Now, there is no provision in the electoral code for that, and there is no provision in the cybersecurity law for that. Is there a possibility of good faith to see Elecam working at least with the candidates that are running in the elections to work together to at least audit the electoral register so that these irregularities that Dr. Eso has just pointed out could be corrected? Do you think that is a possibility in Cameroon?
To be honest, I don't think that's a possibility. Yeah, because if we want to talk about auditing and we want to talk about transparency, it must be seen to be done. And the best way to do it is to have it written down in those frameworks. If we don't have it anywhere and tomorrow you want to defend your rights in violation of some of those provisions, there are no provisions. So what are you defending? Because you cannot defend what you don't see. So that's the problem. So if it's not written down, it's a problem. There is nothing that you can use to tie a LECAM to it. So I see it as a very serious problem. And when you talk about multi-stakeholder engagement, all the political parties are supposed to be actively involved, even civil societies. They are supposed to know about this technology, right from procurement to the deployment and also during use. It's supposed to be tested before the election so that every other party can see that they are working the way they're supposed to work. But if we don't have all of these processes down, it's going to be very difficult. And the issue, I would say the main issue is because there is like a top-down approach when it comes to decision making. It's the government that has the say, and every other person is just to follow. And if you're following, it means that there's no transparency because you're supposed to defend, you're supposed to ask questions, you're supposed to have clarity. So when there is no clarity, it means that you are lost.
And there is a constitutional law argument that can be made to the effect that ELECAM should not single-handedly manage elections because the Constitution itself does not recognize ELECAM. The Constitution recognizes political parties and groups and citizens as primary stakeholders in the electoral process. So these are the people who need to be there at the center of decision-making processes when elections are concerned. But that is not the case. Dr. Robinson, in Nigeria, do you have an idea if INEC, the elections management body in Nigeria, actually brings stakeholders together to review and audit the elections technology?
Not to my knowledge, in terms of bringing them to look at the technology critically, not to my knowledge. In terms of pilot testing, it did use it in a smaller election, in a state election before the general election. So there was some measure of pilot testing. The first time smart cards were used, there was a test where they supposedly brought stakeholders, and the report also wasn't so good. I think there was an error rate of about 40 something percent, which is very, very high, for a public centric system. Yeah. And then, but, elections and the full cycle of elections starts from the registration down to the last publication of the results itself, and then even the election litigation that comes, because you're basically challenging the electoral process. So if, for instance, during the court, you need access to your voting machine to prove something, let's say forensic evidence, you want to do forensic analysis, will they even give you access to it? And even if they give you access to it, there are some jurisdictions that have a certain number of days that they must attend to election cases, after which the window is closed. And if they give you, let's say, 1,000 of those equipment, can you possibly conduct a proper forensic investigation within the short window that you have for litigation purposes? So the way the system is structured makes it very difficult for anybody to attempt any sort of audit. Now, as you noted very clearly, the laws you have in Cameroon probably didn't specify technology, expectedly so. A lot of jurisdictions do have that. But what now is supposed to be done is ELECAM is supposed to now come up with clear-cut guidelines. So let's say they are empowered to so set up guidelines that addresses these issues, well before the election, and get stakeholders, get also private, professional bodies. Like for instance, you have a body in Cameroon, the body of auditors or technology auditors or lawyers, data protection experts, get private people, get the political parties, get the other stakeholders to come have a feel of this, robustly interrogate these, have a documented guideline, a documented process for each step of the way. So, but for Nigeria, I'm not very sure, and if there is, I would know. But there was not that very transparent opportunity for robust interrogation of the beavers in question. There was training for the staff that will use it, yes, but not like they gave private people the chance or political parties the chance to look at it, to ask questions if I need to do an audit of this from an outsider's point of view, because the way the Nigerian justice system is, it is the petitioner that will prove the case, not the other way around. You are already on the losing side, and then you are relying on the electoral body to give you evidence to say that they are wrong. So technically, they're set up to fail, in court. So I don't know if that of Cameroon works that way, but in Nigeria, that's how it works. So the person who fails, who petitions, is the person who has to prove that he was cheated. And how does he prove that? He will rely on the INEC who announced the wrong result or in question, that is being investigated.
So you have raised two things that are very critical to elections. The first is the timeline. Elections are always managed within very strict timelines, and missing those timelines would render any legal challenge actually impossible. And the second one is the evidence. Generally, it's owned and kept by the elections management body. The general rule is he who alleges must prove, but in certain legal circumstances, the burden of proof or the person who must tender the evidence can be reversed because of this technical requirements. You, the political party, cannot prove that the election had been stolen unless you have access to it, and that is why giving political parties or candidates access to audit these resources would be relevant. But again, time constraints. For the case of Cameroon, especially with the national electoral list, I believe that if parties or candidates had the right to audit the list, they have enough time to do it. Since the 30th of December till today, I think they can do it before the election. So those are little things that can be done to open up the electoral field. But as you people have said, Cameroon does not want to evolve, and some of these mistakes are not mistakes. They are intentional. The legal lapses are also intentional. I think, and I presume, I need to be proven wrong. Dr. Eso, as it stands, does your organization have any plans to work with political parties or the candidates who are running at these elections to help them see what you have brought out? Because you have organized a press conference, yes, you have invited them to come, but they have not really reacted. Are there any other plans to make sure that your hard work pays by bringing the political parties into the game, because they are the only ones who are going to have the legal right to challenge the elections results in any judicial institution?
We tried to bring them together. For example, concerning all those what they can call mistakes, but what are fraud, in fact, what are already fraud in the preparation of this election before the day of the vote. So, like as we did for the electoral law, as we did also for candidate invalidation by the Constitutional Court, to say the council, to say that the way it happened was not fair, and that normally all political parties should come together to not to say we normally, according to us, they should say if this is not done before, like say for example Professor Kamto or somebody, we cannot compete with Bia and we leave it alone since until he brings back someone like Kamto or another one in the game. But no, each of them are trying to have to fight for the second place, because what we are saying is that these electoral election are not election to win. It is a question of second place. Who will be the most important political opponent of Paul Biya? The one Paul Biya will give 10% or 12% at the end of the game. So they are running for that. And unfortunately, their ears are not open to what we can say now, because all of them are trying now to say, since now the list has been closed and that we know who is going to compete and who is not going, then they are not doing the flyers. They are busy with trying to make the t-shirt, the hats, and to try to rent the place for the meetings and so on like that. And we know that when we call them, they are very, very busy because they have only 2 months. So now I think we just have to leave it go, to let it go, excuse me, and then to wait for the after the 12th of October to begin something else that will not be electoral one.
Yeah. Barrister Remy, from what Dr. Eso is saying, what is your sense about the general acceptance or understanding of computerized, digitalized, and cybersecurity risks within the populace in Cameroon? Do they really think that it is something they need to learn, especially the political parties?
Uh, I would say yes, because it's a necessity. Given the time where we are living now, everything is digitalized. So we have to learn about these risks. Because, like I mentioned earlier, if you don't know something, you cannot defend it. So they need to know about these risks, then they have to learn how to defend these risks. So it is very important that they get to learn about all of these risks that comes with cybersecurity issues. You get.
Dr. Sibe, you spoke about trust in the system, and we know that INEC has been suffering from some lack of trust issues based on public reporting and social media comments. Is INEC doing anything to remedy that? Because for the case of Cameroon, as you can hear, we are not seeing ELECAM doing anything towards building any trust from the populace.
Well, I can't say much or see much that's going on in that regard. I think we're just in the middle of the election cycle. It's a 4-year cycle, and we're just in the middle of it. So I don't know if there are things that's going on behind the scene. But one of what we mentioned, the findings of our research showed was the lack of that, a robust stakeholder engagement. So which means that if they were doing or addressing that, definitely we will be seeing activities going on in that regard. So I can't comment on that. But let me just buttress the question you threw to Remy around the risk itself. If you look at the whole concept of cybersecurity, when you're teaching cybersecurity, you talk about the CIA triad, that is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Now, all three things are also very crucial to an electoral system. The integrity of the election is very important. The confidentiality of or the privacy of the voters, or voter anonymity, like I mentioned, is an important aspect of it, because you want people to expressly and be able to vote without any fear of intimidation. And then you also want citizens' information, because there's a lot of private, personally identifiable information which you want protected. So all of these are things that a breach in cybersecurity would undermine. And then very importantly, availability, like we have seen elsewhere, like we saw in Kenya many years ago, over a decade ago, that caused all of the chaos that had to do with, availability. Even in the case of Nigeria, when results were not being able to be transmitted for the case of the presidential election, that also had to do with availability as well. So the risks are very enormous. We also have risk of external influence as well, beyond just internal influence. There's also the risk of external influence. And even we've seen the United States of America cry out in time past that, about that fear. There are issues of nation state actors also in that regard. So the emerging risks are real. If you look at, like I said, the threats reports, there is a growing case of attacks on critical national infrastructure in Africa, which many years ago that wasn't, we were only dealing with such attacks in the physical domain, but now in the cyber domain, that is happening rather frequently. So these risks are real, and until we factor it in when we're doing our electoral risk management, and then also like your Data Protection Act, which I believe would address that, because every Data Protection Act that's robust enough also talks about the need for a data protection impact assessment every time you're doing a data-centric process or a data-centric project, such as an election. You're dealing with millions of citizens' data. So every time you're either updating the voter register or you're also doing the voting process itself, you're supposed to do a proper data protection impact assessment to ensure that citizens' data are very well secure and protected.
I want to address something, Dr. Ngalim, if I can. Yes, to tell the truth, as you know, or maybe not, we are managing to raise a political transition in Cameroon. We are trying to bring a political transition in Cameroon. In this, during this political transition, we will address these such questions. The system, electoral system, that is supposed to be the last step of the political transition. That means, in our point of view, we should first resolve the main problem that Cameroon are facing now, the northwest southwest crisis mainly, and the security issues in the north of Cameroon, and also try to reform all the institutions to rebuild the country, and finally to set an electoral system that will be fair, normally transparent, fair, and democratic, so that we can end the political transition by an electoral running elections. And in this sense, we are prepared, if we succeed in bringing in a political transition in Cameroon, we are prepared to test the system, to train the people and the party to understand what is the electoral system in the, how can I, computerized way, for example, to explain to people, so that when the new, we are not going to call it Elecam, but normally Elecam, or the one who will succeed to Elecam, should be integrated organ in which all parties or some representative of parties will be involved, and they are going there's going to be a train, so that all these people are trained to understand the system, to see where the problem of the system is. And if we have, for example, specialists like Dr. Sibe, that are technically involved in doing all these, they will be explaining to people what are the issues, what are the risks, and how can we address those risks, so that each participant or each party can check that there is not something that is going on that will bring the election unfair. I think in a political transition system, if we really succeed in doing it, this will be a part of the last step according that will concern elections.
Thank you so much for making that clarification, because the future is the only thing we are certain about. But now the problem is how to get there. Now we have these elections. You are not running at the elections. Are you discouraging people from running at the elections? Or
No, we are not discouraging nobody, because we cannot discourage someone. Everybody is adult, everybody is responsible. So when they run there, they know where they are running. We are not learning them something. We are not teaching them something. They know exactly what they are doing. But what we want to emphasize is just to tell to the public opinion that all what we are saying is happening in front of their eyes. We spoke to our brothers of the Renaissance movement and for the Manidem, and we told them that they will find something. I think you heard this short interview of Kawala that was saying that they already decide before, and they were just looking for a technical reason to justify it in a so-called legal way, but it's totally illegal. So that's what they do. So the only thing we want to do is not discourage the people, but to tell them that you are running for a false election, you are just playing cinema, and you are just actors. Just agree on it and fight for the second place.
ladies and gentlemen, if you're just joining us now, we are watching the Beyond Africa podcast with me, Ngali Bernard, your host, and my guest, Dr. Sibe Tombari, barrister Remy Takang, and Dr. Moise. So we're discussing cybersecurity risk around elections. And Dr. Moise, you just made a very important point about the positioning of IDS or education on technology and its place in the management. I suppose you're talking about elections technology, which should be one of the last aspects of your plan. I don't know if Barrister Remy and Dr. Sibe would agree with elections or technological management being placed at the end of a cycle, because life has grown up to be wholly integrated in a way that elections technology directly affects data privacy, directly affects taxation, directly affects.
Maybe I didn't express myself very well. I'm not saying that at the end it is a step, The political transition has some steps. The first step is addressing the most important issues, not trying to organize elections. And the last step, there are four steps. The last of these four steps is organizing elections, a new electoral code, a new electoral law. Because before the new electoral code, we are planning, if we succeed in our political transition, to change the constitution, even the nature of the state, federalist, something like that. So all this we should be done before, and the political transition will finish by elections, which means that before elections, they will already begin to set up the system, either manual or electronical system. They will discuss. It will be discussed during the political transition. Do we trust in electronical or not? If we say we go back to the manual system, then we will go back to the manual system. If we say we continue with the electoral system, electronic system, computerized system, then we should address all these issues we are talking about. Privacy, data, protect and management of the data so that they don't manipulate the data in one sense or another. All this will be assessed before making the final organization of elections.
Thank you very much for that clarification. Barrister Remy, from the explanations Dr. Moise is giving, are you finding manual elections more credible than digitalized elections?
I would say it's hard to say because all of them have their sorry, all of them have their lapses. When we want to talk about the manual election, there is a lot of work involved, and it's going to take a lot of time. Like we used to do before, years back, it used to take a lot of energy. So I think technology should be like a reliever to make things easy. But then if we want to use this technology, then we have to recognize them. And the first step would be to have them constitutionally recognized. So we have to embed them into our constitution. The integrity of election technology must be there so that everyone will see, so that when we are using them, we know what happens if it goes wrong. The next thing is when it's in the constitution, we have to follow up with electoral laws that acknowledge technology. And this must be like a stand-alone framework, which is going to detail out like the aspects of election technology, the acquisition of the technology, its deployment, testing, and verification. All of these processes must be laid out in that standalone framework so that when we use them and something goes wrong, we know what to do after that process. But if it's not there, it's going to be very difficult. So if we want to talk about using technology within elections, we have to be ready to make sure the infrastructure is there and is solid, is robust, because a lot of things happen with technology. Technology will fail. It will always fail. But when it fails, what do we do? That's the question. All of these things are supposed to be detailed out in that framework so that we know how to go from there. I think that will give us a lot of trust when we are using election technologies.
What do you make of the fact that the Electoral Code requires the biometric voter registration, but it does not require the voter to present that biometric voter registration on election day at the polling station, and the verification is not done through the biometric system?
What I would say is maybe they're just trying to meet up with standards. Maybe they heard it from somewhere that's how it's being done and they want to do it. But you cannot do something out of the blue. You must lay down the framework. If we are using biometric, there should be the technology on site to test them, so that when you swipe or when you vote with that card, all of your details should be seen the way they are, and they are supposed to reflect what is in the electoral register. Is it accurate or is it not? So all of these things are supposed to show, and now we don't have that. So that's why I say is in Cameroon, I would say there's no electoral technology because there's no framework for that. There's no groundwork for that. So it's kind of like frustrating.
Some people may argue that having the verification devices at polling stations may be expensive and difficult to run. So, Sibe, can you run us through the experience in Nigeria? How are voters verified on elections there at the polling stations?
Okay, so the case of Nigeria, there's been a long process. To be very honest, it didn't start today. So as early as 2003 elections, there were some sort of computerization. automatic fingerprint identification systems were deployed. And then in 2007, the direct data capture machines were brought, still didn't succeed that much. And then in 2015, the PVCs were brought, which is what brought in the use of the smart card reader. But then in the elections in 2015, there were issues around verification because the smart card reader had a very high failure rate on election day. And so this again was improved. And in 2022, the BVAS now was brought in. BVAS is the bimodal voter accreditation system. So what this meant was that okay, the same device can be used for enrollment, which is during the registration. The same device also is used for accreditation. And then what it does is it addresses the previous issue of failure of cards by allowing for facial recognition. So, in addition to the use of your fingerprint and then your card to verify you, it also allows for facial recognition, which was a marked improvement. And so that was significant. It was deployed across the nation. And the issue this time, while there were issues of BVAS failure, it was not as high as it was in 2015 or in 2019 because some of these had been addressed. I think some of the issues that happened was after the beavers, what next? And that's where the issue started. Issue of voter transmission, issue of things happening at the collation. Collation, by the way, is still manually done. So from what Dr. Moy and Mr. Remy also said, it's important not to look at elections in silos or aspects of it in silos, but to look at the entire process and then look at how one plugs into the other, even right from the legal aspects, the legal framework. So, if, for instance, if you look at the case of Estonia, the electoral technology wasn't just something that was thrown into the fray on its own. They leveraged existing legislations like the Identity Document Act of 1999, things like the legislations like the Digital Signature Act, also of 2000, Population Register Act, Personal Data Protection Act. Dr. Eso mentioned names of people who had died still in the voters register. That's because we do not have a central database where this thing is getting it from. So you have, the citizens database, population database elsewhere. You have another one for voting, another place. You have another one for driver's license, disparate databases like that. So, but if you have a citizens database like they have in the case of the national ID database, which uniquely identifies every Cameroonian, in fact, it will be automatically because the age is being automated. Anybody who was born, so year will become 18 years at this age. So automatically he's of voting age and he's updated automatically, in the voters register. If somebody dies and they file his death, in the hospital, they update the citizen's record that, oh, this person is dead, and automatically that name is removed. So until we consolidate these records, until we look at the whole process, identify all of the risk and not treat them in silos, we will continue to have these issues across Africa.
I'm sure somebody who is listening to us now and listening to the experience from Nigeria 2003, 2007, 2015, 2022 will just somewhere and say, we told you we don't need to add any technology to this because technology is not going to change anything. It's only going to be more problems. And that sounds like technology is going to be more of a problem. We should be looking forward at making technology better because whatever the case, technology is only going to get better. And if Cameroon is still at the 2007 point where you had the PVCs in Nigeria, meaning Cameroon still has to go through different stages to catch up with Nigeria. That should tell us that Cameroon should not face the same problems that Nigeria has faced because we'll be wise if we learn from the mistakes of others. Dr. Remy, are you seeing any prospects of any Cameroonian politicians from the context of the conversation of today dedicating themselves to solving these technological problems from the elections perspective?
Honestly, I would say no. because if that were the case, we would have seen them talking about this so far. But nobody is talking about that, and that's the problem. Because if you don't talk about something, it means you accept it the way it is. Yeah. So I'm hoping that maybe if they are listening to us, they will kind of like have a rethink and look at the possibility of engaging more in this area. Because the truth is that these technologies are good, they are good, but we have to lay the foundation. We have to lay the right foundation for us to use them effectively. And it's not something that we can just get up on election day and we do it. No, it takes time. It's a process. So we have to start that process. And if they should start talking about it now, then it's going to create more awareness and more people will be curious. They will ask questions and they want to know more. And that's how we are going to build the momentum for people to engage in this area.
I'm curious, did you follow the case where MRC Maurice Kamto brought to the Constitutional Council arguing that ELECAM must publish the National Electoral Register?
I will not say I actually follow it like full time because I had a lot of things to do and it was not like live in a way that you could follow. So it was pretty difficult. But in that regard, what I would say is it is his right and the right of every other political party to demand that they have access to the electoral register. Get because when these numbers are known by everybody, is going to determine how the outcome of the election will be like. Because if they say, oh, this number of people voted on the last day, on the day of election, and you didn't have an idea of how many people were on that register, that's a problem. So when every other political party has access to this number, there will be that transparency, that trust in the process. They will know how many people are going in for the election, how many people are voting, and so they can easily match the results to what they found out before the voting.
Yeah. Did you find it surprising that the Constitutional Council ruled that they did not have the competence to compel ELECAM to publish this list?
I would say that is surprising. Yes, because they are the ones in charge of handling such disputes. So how can they say they don't have the competence to do that? If you have electoral dispute, you take them to the Constitutional Council because they know they are the upper body. They are the ones to decide. But if they are saying that they don't have the competence to ask Elecam to publish, then it means they are saying that they don't have the competence to hear those disputes. So, but I think the problem is that since they say Elecam is like an independent body, but if we look at their structure, most of them or the top or the main people in Elecam, they are being appointed by the president. So I think that's where the problem is. Just like the president of the Constitutional Council is being appointed by the president. So there's that issue of decision making. So
Dr. Moise, were you surprised that all the members of the Constitutional Council agreed with that decision, that they lack the competence to compel ELECAM to publish that list?
I was not surprised because I think that barrister Remy Takan just said before, the system is organized to till elections, in fact. And even I don't know how they say it in English, the judiciary system, because they say the executive system, the legislative, the law system, and the electoral system, and the law system, in fact. The law power, the power of the law is, how can I say, is ruled, is governed by the Constitutional Council. The Constitutional Council is the court above which there is nothing, which means that normally if they are not supposed to solve any problem. I agree with that. But the problem, that electoral problem are solved, issues are solved by the Constitutional Council. That's why it is before the Constitutional Council that people go to challenge for the candidature, for the validation of the candidatures and things like that. Because the Constitutional Council is supposed to have the power of addressing all these issues. But when the Constitutional Council says, I am incompetent to do that, it should then, therefore, point the one who should do. But when they say I'm not competent, they don't say who should. In fact, it seems like in the country nobody is competent. They should have said, if I'm not competent, this is the power that is competent. Is it the administrative, the Minat? Is it Mr. Tanganji? Is it Elekam? Is it the natural and common court of something else? they should say we are not, because this one is the one who should. Because as Constitutional Council, they should know exactly who is in charge of what, since the constitution is the basis of all the law. There is no law that is not related to the constitution, which means that they should say if we are not competent, then this is the one who should be competent. So they should point the one toward which the people has to go to have the answer to the question if they say we are incompetent. But they never said it. They just say we are incompetent and that's all, which means that in fact, the system doesn't want to answer to the question. The system doesn't want to answer to the question.
Yes, thank you. Dr. Sibe, when you listen to both Cameroonians talk about this decision, and I want to come back to the point you mentioned about trust, do you see that Cameroonians trust the electoral system and obviously the outcome of the elections?
Well, if we're doing inferential statistics, yeah, while this is not a fair representation, but it's also very easy to deduce or extrapolate what the generality of the citizens would think about. But like I said, beyond just relying on what they say, I think it's important for me to put myself also in the shoes of Cameroonians as well. So if I am partaking in an election that I know nothing about the voters list, I'm not going to trust that system because, I mean, it's open to manipulation. That's a black box, and an election shouldn't be a black box. It should be very transparent. It should be flexible, transparent, and trustworthy. Let me give you an example, even for Estonia, which we keep going back to it. So Estonia allows you to even vote online. You can vote online, and you can vote days before the election. They even allow you to change your mind. So should you want to change your mind, there's a window for you to change your mind. You may have voted online. You may choose now to go change your mind. Maybe you learned a new thing about your candidate. But that's all this is happening because of the transparency of the process. So I'm not going to be happy voting in an election where the voters list is a magical number or some names you can't even question it, you can't probe it. So I don't think anybody who really wants or is interested in free and fair election would be happy to vote in an election where they are hiding the voters list.
Thank you so much, you all. Thank you so much, Dr. Robinson. Thank you, Boris Aremi, and thank you, Dr. Eso. I would like to get your last words on this as we round up. Let me start with Dr. Eso.
In fact, I want to thank you for the invitation. I hope my English was understandable because I'm not used to speak English every day, so I lost my English, but it was a good exercise. To come back to the issue, to the question of today, I think that the computerized system of election is just a technical, I don't say just like minimizing it, it is important, but it is a technical frame to have fair election. But I think before we reach the stage of computerized election that are really well organized, they should first have a political will before. If there is a political will from the people who organize election, then all these issues will be addressed with the aim and the purpose of achieving good elections. But if there is no political will, we can discuss what we want, we can point, as we did, all the mistakes or the fraud, they will bring no answer to that. That's why I think that for us, we need a political transition. We need to pass from this system of fraud to a system of fair election. And for that, the population has to take the power first and to organize the system after. But with this system and within the system, no change is possible. No improvement is possible. I think we can even give them all the keys. They will do everything not to apply it. That's why I think the problem is more a political will than technical incompetency.
Thank you so much, Dr. Eso. Your English was perfect. I don't think any person would have any problem even thinking that your first language is not English. It was perfect. And thank you. I think I'll need to get some more conversations with you about the political transition you're talking about, just to understand the concept and let other people understand what that concept is all about. Because when we hear political transition, we think about violence. So I will talk with you and we'll work towards that to ensure that the concept is very clear. And if it's something that advocates good governance, transparency, and the development of Africa, why not talk about it? Barrister Remi Takan, could you give us your last words?
First, I want to thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this discussion of today. And for my last word for starters, what I will say is we need an urgent legal reform of the electoral code because from the discussion today, we'll notice that there are a lot of gaps that cannot meet up with the technological advancement. And we cannot talk about the use of technology in the elections when there are no frameworks to govern them. So we need a reform that will introduce all of these points into the electoral code so that we can move on from there. Another thing I want to note is that transparency is a non-negotiable aspect when we talk about elections. And the fact that people don't have access to the electoral register, then I think that is not a good thing to write home about. So we need more transparency when we talk about elections. And another thing I want to highlight is the fact that there must be a multi-stakeholder approach. They have to ensure that all the political parties and the civil societies are being included in this process. That will help to also boost the integrity of this electoral process. So I think if we are to move on to having like free and fair elections, then we must address all of these gaps that exist.
Thank you so much for coming to the Beyond Africa podcast, and I hope to have you again next time. Dr. Sibe, can we hear from you?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Bernard. You've been always been very passionate around the use of technology in elections, and we've had this discussion a couple of times. And thank you for continuing to push it to the front burner because it's a collective responsibility. We all have to keep pushing it. Also, thank my fellow panelists, Dr. Eso and Mr. Remy, for very insightful contribution. The truth is that technology can solve electoral problems, but it will be predicated on the humans. It's the humans that make technology work. Technology is only going to work when, like Eso said, political will, when, like Mr. Remy said, you need the perfect legal and regulatory framework to ensure that this works. So you need humans to make technology work. And Africa, like you all know, and we all know, we have very talented people. We know the answers to this problem, but the problem is that the people who are decision makers don't listen to people who have the solutions, who appear to be ordinary people like us. So you see, solutions are tucked in pages of books like you have behind the over there and perhaps behind me, and these guys never get to read them. So we would keep pushing. I encourage us not to relent. We'll keep pushing, and hopefully someday they will listen.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. That is why we are organizing podcasts like this one. So if they don't read the books, they would watch the podcast. If they don't watch the podcast, they would listen to the podcast. And we encourage journalists in particular to pick a critical attention in this so that they can also publish and talk about this in spaces where politicians sit. So they understand the importance of adopting these technologies in elections. As you have all said, these are not being adopted not because they don't know about it. It's likely because they don't want to do it. And I think our conversation rounds down on the fact that technology can only make elections better if the people who are managing the elections are doing it to make the elections better. So the political will is necessary. And education is also necessary. This could be tied with the legal reforms that we need to advance Africa. Technology is only getting advanced, and there is no way Africa can sit behind and ignore the development of technology. Meanwhile, we need transparency in our elections. And I think it's time for us to put transparency at the forefront by encouraging multi-stakeholder avenues where all parties come and discuss on the advancement of Africa. Because good governance requires that we work collectively to advance the continent, and power holders should be working to advance the continent and not only to conserve their power. So, ladies and gentlemen, on this, we thank you so much for watching the Beyond Africa podcast today with me, Ngali Bernard, your host, my guest, Dr. Robinson Sibe, Barrister Takang Remy, and Dr. Moise Eso, who have contributed enormously for us to understand why and how the risks related to the national electoral risk, to the national electoral list are fundamental and why they need to be resolved to organize credible elections. Because once there is no trust, there are no elections. We can do the cinema, we can perform whatever we are performing, but the people's patience is running out. And we can see that as Dr. Esa has already said, they prefer not to go to elections. They rather prefer to sensitize citizens on transition, on political transition. So we don't need all this if we apply our intellect, our goodwill, and ourselves to bring forth change in the continent, as we have just done on this podcast. So thank you so much. See you. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and also leave a comment in the comments section. Let us know what we're doing and whom you want to see here. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for coming to the Beyond Africa podcast today.